I'm Andy Crouch, inviting you to download and listen to the new Beer Edge podcast, a source for news, information, and insight regarding the brewing industry and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The show, co-hosted by John Hall and I, talks with key players on the front lines of the beer business to give you insights and advice on how to navigate these uncharted waters. The Beer Edge podcast is available on all major platforms, or you can visit us at beeredge.com/podcasts. Thanks for your support.
This is Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint, and I'm John Hall. And today my guest is Kim Sturdavant. He is the brewer credited as the creator of the Brut IPA, who is joining me on the line from California. Hey, Kim, how you doing?
I'm doing very good. How are you?
I'm hanging in. I'm going to give you a more proper introduction in just a moment. But first, I'm happy to tell everybody that this episode is produced by Beer Edge. Check out beeredge.com for articles, podcasts, and to subscribe to the newsletter written by myself and Andy Crouch. And also be sure to follow Beer Edge on social media, on all of the various social medias at The Beer Edge. So my guest today is a longtime brewer, a wonderful advocate for beer, and a trailblazer of styles. And many of you listening might know him from his days at Social Kitchen and Brewery in San Francisco, where just a few years ago he started experimenting with some enzymes and hoppy ales and gave birth to the Brut IPA. It became an instant success, and when it first came out, it seemed everybody wanted to talk about it. Personally, I was walking through the Craft Brewers Conference, which is an annual gathering for brewers, and I was there as media, and Pete Schlossberg, the man behind Pete's Wicked, saw me from the other side of the room, came walking over quickly. I won't say running, but he came walking over quickly and said, "Have you had the Brut IPA yet? Have you seen what Kim is doing with this enzyme?" And I hadn't. But since Pete was so excited about it, I immediately had to look into it. I called Kim. I wrote some articles about it, and that's how I was first introduced to you and your beers, Kim. And I want to talk about Brut IPA with you at length. But before you even got to that point, there was a journey that you took to get there. What was your introduction to a career in brewing, and where has it taken you over the years?
Well, I graduated from San Francisco State University. I guess it would have been spring semester of 2004.
What is the mascot at that school?
What's that?
What's the mascot?
I have no idea. Didn't really.
Fine.
Yeah, I really don't know.
Look at you with all the school pride. Okay, so you graduated
from. They had
from
a baseball team. I know that. That's about it.
So
they may have had a football
like the
team.
Fighting Bridges or something, or yeah.
Yeah, the Fighting Bridges.
Yeah, the Fog. That. Yeah, that's. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, that just stopped the conversation dead. You were on a like a really good roll, and then I just immediately threw up the speed bump. So thanks.
No, I think it's funny. So I graduated. I had a degree in broadcasting. I was getting a few internships here and there, and just continuing to work my little cafe job, and playing a lot of frisbee golf. And that phase of my life lasted a few years, actually, probably like an extra year and a half or 2 years of just working in a cafe instead of doing something with my degree. And eventually I was playing frisbee golf and bumped into Arnie Johnson, who I'd played with a number of times. And his buddy was talking to him about how I had just started homebrewing. And Arnie is the brewmaster at Marin Brewing Company.
Yeah, long time
which has been around since. Yeah, so they've been around since 1989. So at that point, he had been with them for probably 13 years, 14 years, something like that. And just like a legend in the industry. And, this is late 2006. So, at this time in history, you could just walk into a brewery and be like, "Hey, I want a job here. Can I clean kegs and scrub floors and offload your bottling line?" And they would say yes. Nowadays, it's a little different.
Yeah. These days, they make you just sign a liability waiver first, and then they send you to the bottling line.
Yeah, and then you do it for free for like a few months, and then they decide if they like you and you're battling with other people or something like that. But yeah, it was just kind of looking for a new direction and a career path in life. And was literally doing all those things, scrubbing the floor, offloading the bottling line, cleaning kegs, filling kegs. And I really liked the type of work it was, that I was using my body, that I was physically doing something. At the end of the day, there would be a big pile of bottles or kegs or whatever, or an empty tank or a clean tank. It was just very like tangible and very rewarding. And I was making more money than I was at a cafe. I wasn't getting paid great, but for me at the time, I thought it was pretty good. And from there, I just kind of worked my way up over the course of 5.5 years to be the assistant brewer there. And it's generally a small 4-man operation is how Marin worked. It was like a production brew pub. We did around 2,500 barrels a year. Probably about half of it or more was sold just right over the bar. So just awesome business model, classic brew pub, big outdoor space. And I actually let Arnie know early 2012 that I was going to start looking for something else, because I was just ready to move on from, I was doing a lot of graveyard shifts there at the time. And, it was time to make my own beer instead of filtering and brewing someone else's recipes. And so probably within a few weeks, the job at Social came up, and Arnie kind of clued me into that through another mutual friend. And I applied and got the gig there. And I was there for seven years, I think, exactly. And the owners there, they just really needed somebody to kind of take the reins and do whatever they felt like, and do whatever the brewer felt like. The owners didn't know too much about what the industry was doing, or, what was a good decision, what was a bad decision, what kind of beers we should have on tap. So it was a bit of, a lack of support in that I didn't have anybody to help me do anything. I had to figure it all out myself, including like paying taxes and making sure all our vendors were paid, and
Yikes.
things some brewers have to do, but not most.
Yeah.
But I also got the freedom to do whatever I wanted. So really grew the program up there. The last year I was there, I had an assistant, I think, for about 3 years at that point, and we were just cranking along. We did, I think, 1,000 barrels with just the two of us on a very manual system, including the cake cleaner was manual, and all the ingredients going up to the third level and then coming all the way back down to the bottom floor when they were done. And we did really good there. So
I wonder.
Yeah. Oh, that's. And then I left after 7 years. Which we were talking about it. Just kind of was like, yeah, this one's working. It's just time to go and off to the next adventure. Mostly just because there was only 4 fermenters, and I was looking around and seeing what other people were doing, and looked like they were having a lot more fun than I was. So
with just being limited by the 4. I'm curious with Marin and also Social Kitchen, though, because so many breweries that open up today were not of that brew pub model. Were not where food was also being served, and I'm curious if and these days, like there's food trucks and everything, but it's still it's a brewing business, not a a beer and food business.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think having a proximity to a kitchen informed you as a brewer, or inspired you as a brewer, or opened up different pathways that had you gone into just a straight up production tap room model, it might have been different for you?
Not really. I feel like if anything, it kind of restricts you, in that you kind of want to keep things a little more family friendly. I don't know if that's the right term, but maybe like a little more generic, and catering to people that are out just to get like a bite to eat, but then you happen to have beer there. I don't know. I mean, that was kind of the deal at Social Kitchen. It always seemed like it was like a restaurant with a little brewery tucked in the corner, in terms of like the way the space was laid out and just the business itself. But I don't think a kitchen should have too much of an impact on a beer program. I mean, in theory, they could work together.
Yeah.
But in practice, when everyone's like, oh, we'll have beer pairing dinners and do this and that, like, that's actually not that big of a thing. At the end of the day, if you had like beer pairing options on your menu at all time, I don't think people would really care too much, to be honest.
Okay.
I think they'd rather just have really good food and really good beer, knowledgeable staff, proper glassware. same things you'd want, in a tasting room.
Sure. No, the reason I asked was I had Jeff Stuffings from Jester King on the show a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about how they have a new chef and they're growing their kitchen there, and that he's finding himself inspired by a lot of the stuff that the chef is bringing in, and that
Yeah.
his brain is now working in a different way as a brewer. So but he had started off as just a production brewery
Yep.
without the full on food element. So I was just sort of looking for the flip side of that, if there was one, of having a
Yeah, and
kitchen
I
from
mean,
the
I think
start. Yeah,
his beers are a lot more prone to having, like spices and fruits and things like that added to them,
sure.
than stuff I've made historically. So that makes sense. I mean, for me, like the new spot I'm at is a brew pub model, which not a lot of people are doing these days. But we have a huge outdoor beer garden, really big indoor space, and our chef is also the owner, and he's very hardworking and passionate. And the food program here is phenomenal. I'm really impressed with it, and I love eating the food here. Um, and
But you don't necessarily find it informing your.
No,
Cool.
not
Okay.
not specifically. Like I don't see him doing something in the kitchen, where I'm like, oh, I should incorporate that into the beer. My thought here is more, Pacifica is a smaller town. They have one other brewery here that just opened up a few years ago, so they're kind of new to this whole craft beer thing. And my goals here are to make beers that are really appropriate for the space and for the clientele, and then kind of lure them into drinking, like all of a sudden knowing the names of all their hops that go into an IPA and getting excited, when they see like Nelson or Strata, on the menu. And also, the first flagship beer that I've designed here, and I hope it sticks, we'll see if people love it or not. But it's like a Helles lager, inspired by just going to Munich, Germany and drinking huge glasses of Helles, because I think our space here is perfect for that, and it's a great place to have that experience where you're drinking a big frothy glass of pale lager, like outdoors while you snack on some food.
Yeah, you're going to get no argument from me, and anybody who listens to the show knows that I could very much follow you down this rabbit hole of talking about mugs of Hellas. So before my poor instincts take over, I want to jump back to Social Kitchen and then come back to Pacifica where you are now.
Yeah.
For fermenters at Social Kitchen, what were you making then, and what were you focusing on making, I guess, is the question. And then how did you have time or even the space for experimentation?
Well, at Social, the brew house and the fermenters were kind of oversized for the business itself. So it was important to also focus on some distribution just to keep the tanks turning over, to keep the beer fresh and keep the yeast happy. And so I always had a Pilsner on, and that was generally occupying two of the 30 barrel fermenters we had there. We had two 15 barrels as well.
Mm-hmm.
So always Pilsner, which is why I'm making Helles now, is because I've made enough Pilsner and everyone else is doing it. And there's no consistently brewed Helles in the Bay Area at this moment. So that was one of the styles, and I love making lager. Just think it's really fun and very different than ale brewing. And then other than that, we had a flagship IPA called The Smell. Yeah, loved that name, and then our English Pale Ale, Mr. Kites, that I got a gold medal with at GABF a couple times. That one, always tried to have that around, and then just kind of like a mishmash of other types of ales and things. And also by the last year I was there, because I was bored of having 4 fermenters, I actually built but I had 5 wine barrels that I would do primary fermentation in and maturation and stuff in. So I was playing around with different styles of like barrel fermentation beers, and I was doing anything from an English IPA to a porter, and then as the barrels got a little older, I was like, I should probably do some saison-y kind of things, and then by the end of the year, I was probably on my 6th beer or something going through those barrels. I ended up making like a Brett beer of some sort. So I was playing around with that. So like here and there, I could find little pockets to sneak in like an experimental beer of some sort. So probably like once a month or so, I'd brew something I'd never brewed before. And the rest of the month, I was just trying to keep up with the few brands that we had.
So when you say brewing something that you hadn't brewed before, those were styles though that were already existing, right? They were, like, oh, I haven't done a triple for a while. I should try to do something like that, right?
Yeah.
So then, how was the Brut IPA born? Because it seems like, again, if you have this sort of limited space. If you're going to brew a quad or a triple or something that like you hadn't spent a lot of time on, experimenting with different ingredients and enzymes, like how did that jump happen?
Well, I knew I'd use the enzyme in our triple IPA to get it as dry as possible.
And I should say I'm terrible with the pronunciation, but it's amylase.
Amyloglucosidase.
Yeah.
Is the specific one I was using.
Okay.
I think there's other enzymes you can use as well to achieve a very similar thing, or even techniques. But I was dumping amyloglucosidase into the fermenter for a triple IPA, which is a trick I got from Cellar Maker. They were using it, I think, also in their triple IPA at the time, or at least a batch of it, and they're using it in imperial stouts and things as well to get the ABV just way up there.
For those who don't know how it works, can you what was the intent then, and what did it do for those triple IPAs?
It turns all of the starch in your mash and all the sugars in your mash into glucose, which is fully fermentable. So it just, normally when we're making beer and we're mixing all our grains up, we're making a multitude of fermentables and might even have some starches left over at the end. And this just turned all of it into fully fermentable sugar, if you did it correctly. And another application, like what I was doing in the beginning of it, was actually just adding it to the fermenter, which proved to cause problems. So I stopped doing it that way. But basically it just turns everything that could turn into glucose. And then your yeast eats all of it and you have a bone dry beer.
Yeah. So you're doing that on triple IPAs, and there are brewers that were using it for imperial stouts and things like that. But the Brut IPA isn't necessarily a triple IPA.
No, and it like one of the things is if the ABV creeps up, I think much above 6.5%, you start getting sweetness from the flavor of the alcohol in the beer. So one of the big issues in the beginning was I think brewers were making these beers and kind of not calculating that they were actually going to finish at 0 degrees Plato and end up with these 8% examples of it that didn't really taste any different than like just a crisp West Coast IPA.
So you went smaller.
Yeah. I think the first one I did was right around 7%. And then I quickly figured that out and started to really shoot to get them between 6 and 6.5% to get them as perceivably dry as possible in addition to dry.
And so were you setting out to try to bring a new style to the masses?
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of a let's see if we can do this and let's see if it works. Like, why not? I definitely wanted to, like, for it to be recognized as something different and a new approach to designing an IPA, which is why, the first batch I named it Hop Champagne, and, in our Instagram post called it out. I said, we're calling this beer an Extra Brut IPA. Here's what that means. Kind of explaining it so that when somebody read it, they're like, oh, this is, something new. Right away, the local brewers, started coming through, really curious to try it. Seth from Magnolia, Phil was at Triple Voodoo at the time, and Tim from Cellar Maker, to name 3.
Yeah.
They all rolled through like within a couple of weeks and tried it, and then we're like, I'm gonna try and make this too. Like, do you mind? And I just was excited, that they would, and said, like, if we all call it the same thing, maybe it'll get some attention, and we'll have like a beer style that's, you know, native to San Francisco. So we did all that, and it worked.
But it evolved over time, right? So you made reference to the first batch where you were using it, using the enzyme in the fermenter, but then you stopped.
Yep.
What were the complications that you were having with it in the fermenter?
Yeah, the main thing was that I just thought the enzyme was like chewing away at actual like hop oil and flavor. So I was like adding tons and tons of hops to these beers, and then by the time it went on tap, it would be kind of mellow in aromatics and flavor. And so I think it also, the beers had this kind of distinct sort of stale quality to them. Reminded me of like a glass of beer sitting out, you know, on a table for an hour, and then you get back to it, and it just smells kind of like mushroomy or something.
Yeah.
So I was fearful the enzyme was actually making the beers not taste as good. That was probably my primary concern. And then the secondary concern, and this was the issue for a lot of people that were using it in the fermenter, was the fermentation just never really stops. Like the enzyme is always finding something else, like a little bit of starch to turn into sugar. So your yeast stays active almost indefinitely. And a lot of people are having issues with diacetyl popping up, you know, well after even after the beer had been packaged. You know, it would go into a keg or something, and the enzyme would still be active, perhaps even at a cold temperature. I'm not really sure if other people had, like, if they stored it long enough for that to happen. But a lot of the beers had a lot of issues with diacetyl, which mine, I got a little bit of it in, I think maybe the third batch that I did. But it wasn't like an offensive amount, but a lot of them were like pretty offensively filled with butter and not good. Yeah, I started doing it in the mash.
Yeah, I was going to say, so then you moved where you were applying it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that way, you know, once you boil it, you denature the enzyme, and you've kind of created this, you know, this meal for the yeast that isn't going to change. It's like, it's a set thing. And I thought, immediately the flavor and the aromas were much better, and there was no fear of diacetyl anymore. So it was, in my opinion, a superior method. And at that point, I was trying to, you know, when I was doing interviews with people, I was like, yeah, don't do it in the fermenter. I know I said that in the beginning, but like, it's a bad idea. And other brewers would argue with me and be like, nah, dude, fermenter's the way to go. Gets it all the way to zero. It's awesome. Beers are great. And, you know, I'd drink them and be like, I don't know, man, I get a little butter in there. And they're like, nah, dude, it's great. So I kind of created my own beast.
So that's a really great segue, right? Because there are established styles of beers that exist. You know, like we sort of understand what a West Coast IPA is. We now sort of understand what a New England style is. You know, we can tell the difference, you know, between a dry Irish stout and an export stout, or, you know, there's all of these established things. Your beer, it seemed, and your style that you wanted to be native to San Francisco, you were still sort of tweaking it like on the fly, and then other people were sort of tweaking it as well. Did it ever get a chance to sort of cement itself with style guidelines?
I mean, in my head, yes. And I think overall for the whole community, I mean, eventually the Brewers Association, you know, it was in their GABF, you know, entry information about, actually, it was part of a category called emerging IPA.
Yeah.
Which was developed, I think, partly because of the Brut, and other IPAs that just didn't fit into categories were just accumulating.
Right.
But in doing that, I forget if they. Actually, I don't think they defined it in their little.
No,
you know,
and that's the thing. Like it's one of those. If you've ever read beer judging guidelines, it's, you know, ABV can be 0 to 100 and SRM 0. Yeah, it's sort of one of these catch-all categories kind of thing.
Yeah. I feel like when I've read things about what it can be, the ABV it's like allowable to have it up to like 9%, and that's something I'm like, no, like it can't. Like that's a hard no.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, for me, right off the bat, I was like, you know, the things that defy it are it's really dry, and the ABV can't be above 7.5, but it should really be below 7, and it needs to be as pale as possible. Like you don't want
And
it to be
clear.
orange. No, it doesn't have to be clear.
Okay.
That was another thing where I don't care, and I almost all the ones I put out were, you know, at least partly hazy. You know, had like a haze to them. But some of the ones I put out were just hazy. Like I didn't want to even put findings in them. I wanted all the hop character I could get.
Okay. All right. So ABV in that 6-7% range. Pale, dry. What else defines a Brut IPA?
I mean, those are the main things. I mean, other than that, it's like the hop profile, like the intensity, the aroma, the flavor should all be, you know, what you would associate with an IPA.
And is it dealer's choice as
Of
far as
like what
hops
that
go?
profile would be like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If you want to go really piney, that's all good. It makes more sense, in my opinion, to go big tropical fruit bomb and try and make it taste like a Sauvignon Blanc or something. But that's dealer's choice for sure.
So you've put this out there as to what you hope it would be and what people would follow. We've seen fruited versions, we've seen barrel aged versions, we've basically seen Brian Yeager years ago used to call these the India Silly Ales, where people would sort of just screw around with them. But in so many cases it was messing around with styles that had been around forever, so that people had a baseline of understanding. Okay, like I understand how you got to this point with this, fruited whatever, or this sort of crazy whatever version of the style, and I understand that just simply because I've had a traditional West Coast IPA, I've had a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, so I can understand where it came from to get to where we are today. Did your style ever have a chance, do you think, as it grew as fast as it did, to put your idea forward into the minds of the drinkers?
I don't think it did. I think kind of the larger examples that did like come to the surface, over time were generally there was something like lacking about almost all of them. So I think by the time anybody could really dial it in and make a really good one en masse that like a lot of people had access to and were talking about, there was enough bad ones out there that people had already decided that the style was dumb, they didn't want to make them anymore, and the consumers weren't that interested in them. So
yeah,
it kind of died, I think, for those reasons.
Has there been a resurgence, or let me rephrase that? What do you see, or where do you see Brut IPA today in the American drinking landscape?
I think at the moment, I mean, basically nobody makes them, and there's memes out there, being like, "Oh, thank God this thing's dead."
What is that? What does that do to your psyche?
Oh, I think it's funny. I don't take it personally. I mean, I'm not the one who brewed all the ones that nobody liked, and the ones I made, I think people tended to like the ones I made. And it was funny, like at Social Kitchen, we're in our own little bubble. It's not like a bunch of beer geeks are going there. We're just like a neighborhood pub, and our own clientele they didn't even know what it was. And then if you went to so it was kind of hard to sell for that reason. And then if you go to a hype tasting room place, people there didn't want to make them, they didn't want to drink them. They'd still rather have 10 hazies on tap with like no variation. And that's it never really found a place where it made sense, I guess, to sell.
Yeah. I'm scrolling through as we're talking right now the Pacifica Brewery .beer website and looking at all of the various beers that you have, where I'm seeing some IPAs, some hazy IPAs, an Irish Stout, Tangerine Goes. I'm not seeing a Brut IPA. Are you not making one right now?
No. I've been here about 3 months, and my number one goal right now is to make things that sell fast and that I think are like what a market like Pacifica wants, which I believe is going to be lots of IPA and a really good pale lager for the people that want like some easy drinking things. So of all the beers on that menu, which may or may not be updated, if there's a Helles on there, that's the beer I brewed. The Pilsner's from the last guy, and then I've released 3 IPAs so far. Is that it? Yeah. And that's been my beer program thus far. Today I'm transferring a Hefeweizen into a tank, and next week it's going to be more IPA, more Helles, like a cream ale type beer with lemon zest in it that we're going to nitrogenate.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to keep everything really friendly. I want to keep the IPA game here, West Coast and hazy, basically, because I want them to move, fast. I don't want to be stuck with a beer that's going to be on like a hoppy beer like that might, take 6 to 8 weeks to sell. I need everything to sell within 3 to 4.
Yeah.
So all that being said, at some point in time, I'm sure I'll brew one again. And when I was at Woods in the last year, we did a couple.
And that's where you went after
there.
You left Social Kitchen.
Yeah. I took some time off after Social and just traveled the country and the world for about 2.5 months, and then landed at Woods Beer and Wine Company. And we made a really good one over there. Actually, it turned out awesome, and we got to put it in cans. And first time I ever had it in like a proper package. And it sold pretty well for a brute. It sold not as fast as our hazy, but
what does selling pretty well for a brute mean?
Probably a little slower than a pale ale.
Okay, I mean these are like speed metrics IPA that I'm not like fully familiar with, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe as fast as a pale ale. I would say that.
Okay.
So not as fast as an IPA, not nearly as fast as a hazy IPA, but faster than a stout, faster than a porter. Something like that.
In 2 of your previous brewing jobs, you mentioned, sort of, you didn't use the word plateau, but you reached a certain point in your career where you wanted to go and find a new challenge. And
yep.
I find that so interesting because so many folks, if they can get a good thing going, if they have a system that's easy to use that they're familiar with, they might just put down roots and call it a career. And there's people who have had a certain amount of success with it. Does the changing of venues keep you sharp as a brewer? I mean, it's obviously something that's personal for you that you want to be doing, but how does that translate into what you think you're putting forward in the beers that you're making?
Yeah, I guess the changing of venues is always really challenging because you get to a new space and the equipment's totally different. And like at Woods, it's a beer and wine company. My job felt much more like a production job than I'd ever had before. And it was awesome because it was like a team environment. We had, very organized, like meetings every Tuesday with the various taproom managers because we had multiple locations and the owner. And, we had a guy who did all the bookkeeping. And it was this really cool team environment thing, but it was really hard for me to adapt to that because I'd been, so used to just doing whatever and not really having to communicate as much with other people about what was going on. And there it was almost like a full-time job to just like communicate and kind of direct this whole thing. So I was much less hands-on than I was at Social in terms of like actually, work production and making sure, the cellar work was done every day. It was harder to like check on the beers and do those types of things. And also like, every time I go somewhere, there's something about the way the equipment's designed that I want to improve. Redoing all like the standard operating procedures, like where do the tools go? Where else do we need this? Just reorganizing like a whole space to make it easier to work in seems to be something that it takes, a few months anywhere I start anew. So
yeah.
Even at Pacifica Brewery, it's a brand new brewery. First time I've ever had that luxury.
It's only a couple months old, right?
Yeah, so it was installed in 2019, and all the equipment, I think I just brewed batch 31. So there's only been 31 batches brewed here. And the dilemma here is getting the equipment dialed in rather than like trying to fix broken equipment, which has always been my dilemma before, because like Social System was built in 96. Woods had a system that was built in 97, but it was owned by a bunch of other breweries. So it had some pieces of it that needed some love. And Marin Brewing Company was built in like 1989.
Yeah.
So this is, I mean, by far the newest brewery I've worked on. And it's cool. It's like, I know I'm going to make the best beer I've ever made at this spot, because this is by far the nicest equipment I've been able to work on.
But you also have the worry now of everything that's raging around outside, right? Because you're not probably having as many people come through the tap room or the brewery as you would hope to put your beer in front of them because of COVID.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's very unique challenges at this moment, and
what do you think is the biggest one you're facing right now?
Just the uncertainty of, I mean, it would be, you want to plan ahead, as far as possible. Even a small place like ours that, like I don't need to know what I'm brewing a month from now, but to know if a month from now I needed to have, half of our beer in cans because our tap room's going to close again, that would be good information to have. And, we're not going to have that information really ever, I don't think.
Until it's right on top of you. Yeah.
Like what's going on, a month ahead in these times. And so that's definitely the biggest challenge is almost like the format of how the beer is going to get consumed by somebody, and trying to design things to be as flexible as possible without, with not a lot of information. And we are just super fortunate. We have a huge and very comfortable and attractive outdoor space, which I think is going to allow us to keep operating, through these times. I don't see the California government shutting down outdoor, restaurant seating again, and who knows, it could happen.
Sure.
But the indoor seating for sure, I don't know if that's going to come back until there's a vaccine. So yeah, it's just kind of getting creative, I guess, and doing things that maybe you normally wouldn't have done. I mean, this space was designed to have a brewery that's the perfect size to serve our seated area, and nothing else. But since getting here, it makes tons of sense to get our mobile canning company to come through and can up a bunch of our beer. Yeah. And give it to our distributor and have them, we had to get a distributor and have them sell the cans and even a couple kegs for some of the other businesses that are around.
Yeah.
And fortunately, we don't, we're still a small space. It's a 10-barrel system. We have like 70 barrels of fermentation capacity. Like, I'm not trying to, move like tons and tons of beer, but it's just me and the owner pretty much figuring it all out and working with our distributor to just try and predict where things are going to go and how much we should be making and what we need a month from now as best we can.
I know everybody is focused on the immediate and then obviously worried about the long term right now. Where does innovation, or what should brewers be thinking about when it comes to innovation, and what should drinkers be asking for when it comes to innovation in their beer? Because it does seem that, you created something, or put something out onto the market, and everybody sort of followed through, and then it kind of disappeared. But we haven't necessarily seen anything else like that since. And 2 years is a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I know.
Is there enough innovation happening in the industry, I guess, is the more dialed in question.
Yeah, I think there is. I think people are still innovating. I mean, innovating now means like adding a ridiculous amount of fruit puree, to like a sour beer that's 8% ABV. which people are getting more aggressive with, I guess.
Yeah. Is that innovation though?
That's a good question. I think it's arguable. I can't even say that I've had any of those beers, so I can't really judge them, but it just kind of seems a bit silly to me that those are popular and that kind of the consumers continue to, like, the market that continues to expand and get the most attention is this kind of beer that doesn't taste like beer market. That, it can be fun here and there, but it's certainly not what I would want to dedicate my career to.
Yeah.
But what I think, as it relates to COVID and kind of the situations we're in, I think innovation comes from thinking about what type of scenarios people are going to be drinking beer in and what kind of beer they're going to want in those scenarios. And for example, like when California first went into shelter in place mode, and, for a period of that, I was just cooped up at my girlfriend's apartment for a few weeks. And I did not want to drink hazy beer because it was too filling. And all I wanted was really good, crisp, 6.5% IPA, because I love my hops. And I think that, maybe like the drinkability factor for certain situations is going to be like something that will evolve in this time. There's probably other people that actually, I feel like the heavy and filling beers like hazies and smoothie sours, I would think would lose a little momentum in these times if people are spending more time at home and kind of docile. I would think they want something crisper and lighter and a little more refreshing, just so they could drink 4 of them instead of 2.
Yeah. Will the Brut IPA ever make a comeback?
I don't think so, but only time will tell. I saw one. I was up in Oregon about a week and a half ago, and there's a brewery from Olympia called 3 Mags, and I think they're pretty hip. And they had I think the name of the beer was "Is This Still a Thing?" Question mark.
That very easily also could have been Cascadian Dark, just based on the name.
Totally. But it was a Brut IPA. I saw it at the grocery store and I bought it. And the label was hilarious. It had like a fidget spinner on it and some other things that are like outdated now, that kind of came and went, and even a picture of Joe Biden, which I was not really sure what the statement is on that, but I think it's funny. And
I'm sorry, what's the name of the brewery again?
3 Mags.
3 Mags.
Like the number 3 and then MAGS.
Okay.
But it was a super funny label and just kind of totally having fun with, making the Brut IPA the label and I would say like the tone and the humor of it was very much like a hazy, but it was a Brut IPA. And
how did it taste?
I thought it was pretty cool. And it was good. I got a couple and I drank them and they were super solid and very, very in line with what I think the style is.
It almost strikes me that you need to have some sort of like cask mark or camera seal or even like an upside down bottle or something of the ones that meet your approval. That might be the only way to get the style established at this point. Maybe like a picture of you with a thumbs up or something that people can put on their cans, so that people know that it's an actual solid Brut IPA.
Yeah, if people want that certification, they can just send me a can and I'll send them I'll come up with something they can put on their label.
You heard it here first. Hey, before we go, and I'm going to give you a minute to think about it, but I'm going to ask you whose beers you've been drinking lately that you're really digging, aside from 3 Mags. And while you think about that, I'm going to remind folks that the show is produced by Beer Edge. So check out beeredge.com and subscribe to the newsletter, and also download the Beer Edge podcast, hosted by Andy Crouch, with new episodes every week. And also check out Steal This Beer and the BYO Nano podcast. And don't forget to go onto Apple Podcast or wherever you download podcasts and leave a review of this show. If you have questions, suggestions, or guests you'd like to hear, you can email me at johnholl, it's JOHNHOLL, at beeredge.com, or reach out on Twitter at John_Hall. Nate Schweber does the music. Jeff Quinn designed the logo. And Kim Sturdavant of Pacifica Brewing.
Yep.
Who are you digging these days?
Altamont Beer Works out of where I think Livermore or something like that. That's in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay. They've always crushed it at making very dry, clear West Coast style IPAs. So I've been drinking a ton of theirs. It gets to the bottle shop down the street from me. Wayfinder from Portland, Oregon.
Oh, yeah.
If I can find their stuff anywhere. Kevin's making some of my favorite lagers, as well as Lisa from Heater Allen Brewing Company. Heater Allen Pills is my favorite pills.
Oh, sure.
And it does get down here, so I gobble that one up pretty often. And then, like California, there's a lot of breweries that are shipping statewide right now. So I got a case of some Highland Park Good Green IPA about a little over a month ago. That was awesome.
Dig what Bob's doing. Yeah, we just had Bob on Steal This Beer a couple weeks ago.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So I was snacking on that. It was like a really solid, just crisp West Coast style. Faction in the East Bay is, Roger over there has been making phenomenal beer since before I got into the industry, and he's still at it. So I made a little mecca over there a couple weeks ago to get a couple cases of his beers. Did not regret it. And Hen House locally, they are just fresh fanatics, and they do not hesitate to pull their beer off the shelf after I think if it's a month old, they take all their cans back and swap it out with the retailer. And so and they're big enough now, and they have their own canning line that you can get their IPA for like $13.99 or so. It's just a great deal, and you always know that beer is going to be screaming fresh. So big supporter of those guys as well.
That's you're making me really want a West Coast IPA, so I'm gonna end it here so I can go downstairs to the beer fridge and see what I have. Nothing as fresh as what as what you were just describing, and I might actually have some old Bruts sitting in the way back of the fridge, so maybe I'll
Bruts. Yeah, there's only old
Is that
ones now.
that a style? Could that be a style?
No. It's like saying aged IPA is a style.
And it's American barley wine.
Yeah, it'd be like a barley wine hard seltzer, you know?
Fantastic.
That's what an aged brew would be.
Kim Sturdavant, thanks for taking the time. And Pacifica Brewery.beer is the website for the new place that you're at. And anybody who's out in the area or traveling, you should go and check them out. Thanks again for taking the time and walking down memory lane with me.
It was fun. I haven't done an interview regarding Brut in well over a year. So
well, we're anything but topical on this show.
It takes me back to mid 2018. Yeah, it's nice.
Thanks again.
Yeah, cool, man. Cheers.
Cheers.